Good afternoon and welcome if you are joining now here in the room or you're tuning in at POLITICO Sustainable Future Week Summit. I'm Tommaso Lecca and I am an aviation reporter at POLITICO, and we are here today to discuss a greener future for aviation. To decarbonize air transport, European lawmakers and industry are betting big on sustainable aviation fuels, known as SAF, as a cleaner alternative to fossil kerosene. However, the production of SAF requires the availability of biomass and other sources, making them up to 4 times more expensive than fossil fuels. We are here to discuss these issues with our panelists. But before we start, I would like to remind you to join the discussion on any social media of your choice. I hope to hear from you. And now, without further delay, it's a pleasure for me to welcome our distinguished panelists. Starting from my left, Darian Mess, former member of the cabinet of European Commissioner for Climate, Wopke Hoekstra, and currently at DG Climate. Agustin Reina, Director General at the European Consumer Organization, BEUC. And Marlene Bastin, Head of Available Sustainability at Eurocontrol. Thank you for joining. I just wanted to start with a brief reply from each of you. In the introduction, I mentioned some of the problems related to sustainable aviation fuels, such as trade production, their availability in European airports. We know that nowadays most of SAF is produced in the United States. Not to mention the price and their impact on airline tickets. So when you think about sustainable aviation fuels, what is the first problem to be solved? If you can please answer in one or a few words.
Yeah, sure, and thanks for having me. Well, first of all, I think that to start with what I think is the consensus already is that sustainable aviation fuels is really the most promising way to green aviation, and to make sure that I also sense some leadership also in the sector itself, that greening the fuels is the license to operate for airlines. So I think that's where the consensus is. And then of course you come to the challenges, and you're absolutely right, there are quite a few. You know, we now have, with our various climate laws, including our so-called Refuel Aviation Law, which sets dots on the horizon on the amount of these sustainable fuels that we need. That's now clear, and the big challenge will be now to ensure that the market and the industry can find their way in reaching these targets, and that requires a serious discussion on how do you de-risk the right investments so that these fuels come to the market.
So in a word, can we say scalability, or?
Yeah, I think that scalability is a good word. Like the next frontier is indeed the right environment, and then I mean the right business environment to scale these fuels up. So that will be the industrial challenge.
Agustin, what is the top challenge?
Top challenge, I think, is flying less. Number one, aviation is not sustainable. That's a reality. It will never be carbon neutral. So the question is, if we want to move forward, obviously, sustainable aviation fuels play an important role, to help this sector decarbonize, but it's not going to be the silver bullet. I think we need to look at the broader picture. People want to go from point A to point B. How we can make it more convenient and simple and affordable for people to do so. Obviously, bearing in mind that has to be done in a sustainable manner. The question of scalability, it's indeed an issue. Today, these fuels are extremely expensive. At the same time, we see that over the years, a lot of investment has been put in the aviation sector, opening up airports and making it easy through state aid support mainstream business models. So that requires a very significant change. But we cannot forget, at the end of the day, that we need to look at alternative modes of transport to make it easier for people to go from point A to point B.
Thank you. Marilyn, what's the top challenge in your opinion?
So just one small comment about what you were saying, that aviation is not sustainable. Actually, if you look at it from an energy point of view, no transportation sector is currently sustainable, because when you look to the electricity production in Europe, it still bears a lot of fossil fuel energy. But now to come back to the sustainable aviation fuels, we have just published a few weeks ago a think paper on how to decarbonizing the long-haul flights. And this is really important because those long-haul flights, it represents 8% of the traffic, but more than 50% of the emission. So we really need to target those flights. And to decarbonize the long-haul flights, sustainable aviation fuel is, of course, the solution. But how to make it happen? So in our study, we were looking to the feedstock and also to the energy side. So if you are asking me what is really the biggest challenge, it's really the energy challenge. Just to give you a figure in our paper, to decarbonize whole long-haul flight at ICAC area, so it's more than 40 states, we need more than 73 nuclear plants to get enough energy to produce the amount of SAF that is necessary to decarbonize those flights. So this is really a huge challenge, but as I was saying at the beginning, this is also a common challenge for the whole transportation sector, but also other sectors, by the way, like AI, for instance, because we see we need more and more energy. So it's really about energy that we need to discuss and focus. Yeah.
So just to wrap up, we can say scalability, flying less, and energy are the top priorities of this panel. I will stay with you, Marlene, because as you were saying, the EU green aviation ambition will have to face the problem of to cope with the growing air traffic in the sky and the increase of long-haul flights. You mentioned what it will take in terms of energy to decarbonize the most polluting routes, the intercontinental flights. Is there anything that the new Commission should prioritize?
Yeah, so there are different things that needs to be done to decarbonize the whole aviation sector, and maybe I would like to come back to the different pillars to decarbonize the aviation sector, because all those pillars, the technological pillars, need to be supported in a way. So if we speak about the electrification of the aviation sector, this is also an option. With electric aircraft, it has been mentioned this morning, and also hydrogen power aircraft. So it will be for short and medium hauls, but of course, as I said, SAF, it will be for the long haul. But we have also to look about ATM, air traffic management, because as Eurocontrol, of course, we are the network manager. This is really important to optimize our trajectory. Why? Because the best emissions are the ones that are not emitted at all. So if we could optimize all our trajectory, it means less fuel and also less emission. So it means that we would need less SAF and less energy. So it's why we need ATM to be supported. And how it could be done, it's to ensure that the innovation and research is still funded, that we can get the money, because at the end of the day, all the different options to decarbonize the aviation sector will require huge investment, either in new technology, either in sustainable aviation fuel, in infrastructure, but also, as I said, in ATM. And in ATM, what we are speaking about, about new technology, like cloud-based technology, digitalization, automation, all those kind of things that could help us to manage the complexity of the network, because indeed the traffic is still growing. So we really need, to get that support in such a way that we can move forward on those different pillars if we really want to ensure that the aviation sector can decarbonize.
And Augustin, the big question now is who is going to pay for greener aviation? And if cleaner fuel is more expensive than fossil fuel, of course the tickets will be more expensive too. And from a consumer perspective, do you see the green transition as a threat to people's purchasing power?
So I think that's a fundamental question. At the end of the day, there is an element of price signals. The transition will cost money. And like you rightly say, who should pay for it? We consider that it should not be on the shoulders of the consumer alone. This is an effort that all of us, as a society, as an economy, needs to afford, because it's for the future of not only of consumers but also the companies and the economy. I also see it as an opportunity. Obviously, investing in green technologies will help us to achieve our Green Deal objectives. When it comes to aviation and consumers, I think here is a combination of policies. There is, of course, the question of price signals, and probably tickets will have to be expensive, but the question is for whom? 1% of the population is responsible for 50% of the emissions in the aviation sector. So those that fly more perhaps should have to pay more. And I'm sorry, but in this room, we are that 1%. And everybody needs to make its share.
How can you do that?
Well, through incentives. Look at, for example, at frequent flyers. Those that we have to travel much more by air, maybe we will have to pay more for the tickets.
So taxation rather than incentives.
Taxation, or different pricing mechanism, but also not forgetting that with price signals alone, we are not going to do the trick. We also need to have alternatives. And I'll give you just one very concrete example. Today, I'm going for tomorrow the Citizens Energy Forum in Budapest. My colleagues are taking the train. They left last evening. It takes them almost a whole day to get to Budapest.
How are they doing?
Eh?
How are they doing?
They're taking the night train, and then they're changing I don't know where, which is, of course, very nice for them to do. But it should be much easier. It should be much easier in Europe, and that requires, when we talk about investments, let's invest in rails. Let's make trains a real alternative to flying, which today is not the case. And the money will come from the same place, is the taxpayers. So at the end of the day, I think we need to keep all the alternatives open, especially when it comes to giving real alternatives to consumers. It's true that for long hauls, we cannot take a ship to the US or to Latin America, where I come from. But in Europe, it should be much easier.
Daniel, we've just heard that the green transition for the aviation sector is going to be expensive and very difficult, also in terms of energy availability. And it is likely, I would add, to expose Europe also to new dependencies, because we don't have a large domestic production of sustainable aviation fuel today. And also when it comes also to synthetic SAF, whose mandate will come into effect in 2030. We don't have any production at the moment. So is the Green Deal still a good deal for Europeans? And how is the EU going to turn all these problems into opportunities?
Yeah, okay. No, I like that tagline. Is the Green Deal still a good deal for everyone? But if you allow me, I would also want to react a bit first, because I want to make sure that when we give when political attention is given, that we don't completely deflect from this discussion that we really need these sustainable aviation fuels. There is, of course, always a discussion, should we make the train alternative more attractive? But I've now had a long-standing career in working on the sustainable transition in transport, and banning a plane in order to build a train, in my experience, is a very complicated proposition. And you see that also France went that way, but then ultimately really had to look at, okay, we can only do this if there's a convenient way of traveling for the consumer. So that's why we still also really need to focus on making sure that flying itself becomes greener. But I totally share your experiences also with the rail alternative. Like, I had to travel to Vlissingen to see my mom with my 3 kids. That's a distance that you normally by car is 1 hour and a bit. And I took the train, 3 connections, and it lasted 1 Frozen 1 film, 1 Frozen 2 film for my kids to make it to the end of that journey. And everybody can now calculate how long that journey took, but it is indeed an issue. And I think that investment is one thing, but we then need some commitment from the sector in exchange that there's also some modernization going on, and we have a modern train service. So that's why I'm very happy that the next commission and the next the incoming political leadership will work on the tickets, the availability of tickets with a new proposal. Voilà, that's on that. So these fuels discussions, I think, will be important. Also still in Europe, because Europe also still has islands. That you need to connect by a plane on sustainable fuels. And then you get to the question, do you then build new dependencies on other regions? If you look at the situation now, most of it comes from the US. Bit of a mixed bag there. I think that the analysis of the colleagues in the transport department show that on biofuels we're actually quite well on track in terms of meeting the horizon set in the framework. The synthetic fuels is a different discussion, and exactly there, I am personally so pleased that when Draghi came out with his competitiveness recommendations, that he name-checked sustainable aviation fuels as a sector where Europe both still has an edge. If we do it right, we can still make a promising business case out of that. And indeed, if you have more of it in Europe, including in synthetic fuels, you avoid the result that doesn't pass the kitchen table test, that you can explain to your aunt at the kitchen table that airlines are flying to California in order to get the fuels to fly in Europe. So that economic security angle is an important one, and that's why it's important that the Green Deal is now complemented by the industrial deal, the clean industrial deal that makes sure that some more of these synthetic fuels are being produced in Europe.
We will come back later to the clean industrial deal, but I wanted to move back again to the aspect of air traffic management, because in the past term, Merlin, the reform of the single European sky took so much time and energy during the last years, I would say, of the last legislature, and not only. But the result disappointed the vast majority of the aviation industry. And one of the objectives of this reform is to reduce aircraft emissions by improving flight routes. But is there any technological advance in air traffic management that could succeed where European legislators failed?
Okay, it's an interesting way to ask the question, actually. Usually I'm asked about, yes, how the CES is going to help, you know. It's not indeed because we don't have the framework that we would ideally like to have, that the aviation industry is not working on its performance, you know. So for decades now, the whole aviation industry has worked at different level, you know, to optimize the network. So it's about the design of the network itself, in which we did a lot of improvement. Then I mentioned as well that we need, you know, to improve our trajectory from gate to gate, as we said, from A to B. So there are improvements that can be managed at different levels. But there I have something to say, because now when we look to the inefficiencies in the network, it's mainly the connection between the airport and the network. And what does it mean? It means that we have to make a kind of trade-off between noise issues and air quality and emission. So I would like also maybe to emphasize the fact that when we speak about the sustainable sector, we have to look at all dimensions of it. And so this noise emission trade-off, you know, needs to be considered as well. So sometimes burning more fuel, it's also good for the citizen because we are producing less noise, and it's also better from a air quality point of view. So it's really about, you know, looking at the complexity. And then it's also about the airline themselves and their fuel policy, how much fuel they are taking on board. So there are different aspects on which we can work. Now, from a technological point of view, why I was speaking about the needs of investment, it's because the complexity of the network itself. Now we have the geopolitical context, you know, we have less airspace with more flights, but we have also climate change impact, because we should think about the fact that the aviation sector is also suffering from climate change. We saw now in the last months that we have more and more extreme weather conditions that are also affecting our infrastructure, our operation, and we need to become more resilient. And for managing this additional layer of complexity, we need to have more technology, and I was mentioning like machine learning, AI, but it's trajectory-based operation. This is really a shift, you know, in the way we should manage air traffic management in such a way that we can ensure a better predictability through the network. But as I said, you know, really technology will be a key for us, and it's really essential that we can start by that, you know, and while waiting for the other pillar of decarbonization to scale up, by the way.
And Daniel, first I have a question for Augustin again. I just wanted to address, let's say, the elephant in the room every time we are talking about sustainability, which is greenwashing, of course. In 2023, BEUC filed a complaint against what you called misleading campaigns by airlines about the carbon reductions achieved through SAF and other offset schemes. Following Beck's warning, the European Commission launched an investigation into 20 airlines for such practices and gave them 30 days to correct these campaigns. So I have two questions for you. What has happened since the investigation was launched, and have the airlines corrected their practices?
Good questions indeed. We have articulated this complaint for the simple fact that companies should be honest towards consumers. And we say all these schemes were misleading. The Commission opened an investigation against 20 airlines, and by June, these airlines were supposed to propose their different commitments. We have not seen them yet, and we are liaising obviously with the European Commission on this. But the reality is that we are giving the false impression to consumers, that flying is sustainable. When in reality we know that consumers, as a matter of fact, they are very sensitive about the climate crisis. And greenwashing is being spread all over the place because it's a way to attract your customers, make you feel good about doing something that doesn't have the impact that you will expect. So this goes also hand in hand with the regulatory developments, because in the meantime we also have the Green Claims Directive being discussed, where we actually want to get some prohibition, for example, in relation to carbon neutral claims. There is nothing that can be carbon neutral. There is always going to be an impact, and that, of course, affects and can affect, as we're seeing, consumer confidence, because when everybody started to use this type of claims, people just simply stop trusting and stop believing. So those companies that are trying to do the right thing and differentiate themselves, they lose competitiveness towards all those that are trying to feel right on this sentiment.
But if using SAF, it's more expensive than using kerosene, why is it wrong to ask a consumer, well, do you want to fly green? Then you have to pay a bit more. Why is it wrong?
It's not, just to clarify, it's not wrong to ask people to pay more for things that are truly sustainable. But this is not green. That's the thing. It's simply not green. Can produce less emissions, but also depends on the type of fuels, because in the production there is also CO2 emissions involved. So this is not something green. So I'm selling you something as green that you're willing to pay because you want to do the right thing, but actually it's not. So at the bottom of it is really about being honest towards people about what is green and what is not.
Maybe can I react to that? Because if you buy your SAF in Europe, based on Refuel EU aviation regulation, the sustainability criteria are very strong, So normally it is green in a way. If you are buying your SAF in Europe, so why are you saying that it's not?
Yeah, but the question is, what is green? It's such a vague concept that for people and for consumers, being green means it's not bad for the environment. On the contrary, when people will say it's good for the environment, but it's not good because it's not carbon neutral. So the vagueness of these terms is what leads people into make the wrong decisions. That you can use another type of claim to say this is more sustainable than before because we're using a different type of fuel. Okay, at least you're being honest to people about what it is. But if you present things and green and you make greenness part of your advertising strategy, that is ultimately misleading towards consumers.
Daniel, if these fuels are called sustainable aviation fuels, what's wrong with saying that an airplane powered by, even partially by SAF, is more sustainable than an airplane powered only by kerosene?
Yeah, indeed. And I think that the thing to also keep in mind is when you really look at what sustainable aviation fuels, if you have more of them and there are more of them in the engines and the tanks of the planes, what does it really mean for the passenger itself? The detailed work done by the experts in the transport department, Did You Move, show that by 2050 tickets would be 5 to 6% more expensive. Now, if you have an airplane ticket of €100, you can calculate already what that means in a world where passengers currently don't pay for the pollution caused by flying, because there are tax exemptions in that sector. So that is just the proposition that we all need to explain to passengers, that taking a plane comes with a bit of responsibility for what it does to the planet. And to me, at least, by 2050, these numbers don't sound super shocking and explainable to passengers that is then necessary. And then you come to, what is indeed then sustainable. I guess it's also in the interest of the sector itself to avoid litigation coming from the consumer organizations to indeed find a way that what is called sustainable is indeed sustainable. You indeed rightly so said that we have done and dusted that in all these acts that we've produced what is exactly sustainable. And then the question comes, what happens to it in terms of information to the passenger? And there I think that there's quite an interest also in the transport department under the incoming political leadership to at least already ensure that the fuel use is traceable, because currently you would be surprised that an airline that is buying fuels at the different airports doesn't even know what exactly it is buying and what is exactly going into which plane. And that is, of course, makes it very complicated to communicate about this. So the traceability, I think, is something that the transport colleagues will be keen to pick up on. Yeah, and then the question comes, what is truly sustainable? How do we scale that up? De-risking, I would personally think that de-risking of that investment is going to be the important factor here, where you see that banks that often finance these type of operations are just a little bit scared to go into the risk category, where there is really a commercial risk. Can you find clever ways to use public guarantees on the public budget or other types of instruments that hedge the risk to make sure that that risk, there's a bit of safety comfort there, so that the bank is willing to step in and is willing to finance it. And my personal take would be that that is also like an interesting discussion for the next mandate on the industrial side. How do we de-risk that in the context of this Clean Industrial Deal and all these other initiatives? How do we do that de-risking so that these fuels are here? Because again, it is also an economic opportunity, and a person far more important than me, Mario Draghi, says so.
And back to the green claims by the airlines, I think it will also be important to have a system that will enable to communicate in a proper way, because if they say that flying on SAF is sustainable and then the Commission open an investigation on that saying, hey, actually you are doing greenwashing, then sounds like there is a problem here. Do you think there will be a legislative effort to tackle this issue?
I think that one area where the transport colleagues are looking into is because for biofuels, there is already this registry, this inventory that shows which fuels go where. And an interesting question indeed is like, is there a possibility to link the use of sustainable aviation fuels to that, so that the situation becomes clear to everyone?
And you also mentioned traceability. Is this when we talk about a system that has been proposed by many airlines, the book and claim system, in order to trade the SAF credits, so far the Commission seemed a bit skeptical about this system. I know there is an ongoing study on this. What do you think? How do you think we should resolve the problem of traceability of SAF when it comes to also traceability of
yeah, indeed,
grades?
and then this is going to be a challenge, because this is typical one of these topics where you have to translate bureaucrat bingo lingo book and claim to something that is understandable for everyone. Basically, book and claim can mean different things. It is intended to find a clever way to make sure that customers come in for the fuel suppliers to say, I can be your customer under the right conditions if you supply me with the fuel. Traceability is part of book and claim, sort of like, having a registry expanded to these new fuels. If I can trace it, then I can claim it. So that's part of it. And then you have the additional layer where you're absolutely right. There's a sense of caution in the transport department of the European Commission, and that is the layer where you would create virtual use of sustainable aviation fuels. So you would say, I see it's easier to have sustainable aviation fuels physically in Schiphol Airport because it's really big. I don't see it happening really quickly at a regional airport somewhere else. So can I then pretend that I flew on a sustainable fuel at the regional airport by actually flying sustainable from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport? And the reason why the transport colleagues, and my personal opinion is that they're right, they're a bit cautious about that, is that under our framework, at a certain point in time, after a long transition period, all these airports need to have access to sustainable aviation fuels, and that is so important because a regional airport on the island does not have the train connections. They don't have anything else than having this physical supply of aviation fuels. So that's why they're cautious, because like if you have a virtual system that lasts too long, then these other airports are not in time to have the fuels in place. And that's the reason why the discussion is a bit more complicated.
Back to the cost, I wanted to ask something to Merlin. Should airlines or passengers bear the cost for the burden of decarbonization of aviation?
It's a good question. There I share a little bit your opinion. We can't avoid that the passenger will pay at a certain extent the price of the decarbonization, because we have different policy measures that will increase the cost in a way to operate a flight. So we didn't mention it, but there is the EU ETS / CORSIA. So it's the offsetting scheme. Now there were free allowances until 2027, but after 2027 it will not be the case. SAF, the price, the cost is 4 to 6 times more expensive, meaning that again, the cost of operating that flight will be higher. Then we have also a lot of new charges that are coming up at many airports, and this is also the problem in a way, because we see more and more new taxation at local level happening that could also increase the price of the ticket in a way. And so all of that, some airlines are really trying to reduce the impact on their passenger. But I think that at a certain point in time, it will be inevitable that the passenger will have to pay. But I think someone mentioned it, maybe the price will not be so high. In our estimation, because we published a study, it was not so big now, but it depends how we could decrease the prices of SAF in the coming years. This will depend a lot, yeah.
Agustin, on prices.
I can chip on that one. So price formation is a extremely complex science and discipline. Of course, taxation will play a role and can increase prices, but also there are other forces that shape a price at the end of the day. For example, competition. What we are seeing also in Europe is a trend of consolidation in the air transport sector. And that will put a pressure, of course, on prices as well. It's not only because of meeting the Green Deal objectives that prices of air tickets will go up. It's also because we see a trend that very few airlines start to control key routes, and the price goes up. Even before having this discussion, DG Move already started an investigation of why the prices of flight tickets increased so much in the last year. And there is a correlation and probably a certain level of causation with the level of concentration that we are seeing in our markets in the air transport sector. So I think that we also need to look at the broader picture about how prices are going to be formed, and in light also of the profitability and the markups of the companies. Because it's not about increasing the prices for consumers in order to keep the profitability of the companies. The Green Deal objectives need to be achieved with the effort of everyone.
Thank you. I will stop you there because we are about to finish our time, but I have another question for Daniel. It's about taxation, because Commissioner Hoekstra will be responsible not only for climate action, but also for taxation. And we've heard, like in this first, during the hearing process, the European Parliament, and in other occasions, we heard that the Commission will possibly extend the ETS to all flights departing from Europe if ICAO doesn't do enough to tackle the aviation's emission. Then there is the work ongoing on the Energy Taxation Directive that might lead to taxation of kerosene. And there is even a discussion, there's an ongoing discussion, Hoekstra said in his replies to the Parliament, on VAT in the aviation sector. Is reducing travel demand through higher prices part of Hoekstra's strategy to reduce aviation emissions?
Yeah, no, I think that, in my personal view, there is indeed lots happening on the ground, and it's not always consistent with each other. Like what a passenger tax on a ticket is in one country is not the same as in another country. Hence, you have a natural interest to see, like, okay, listen, everybody's doing a bit their own bit. Could we, in some format, make sure that there's a bit of more of a European approach, be it coalition of the willing or whatever. What Wopke will do, ultimately, I really leave entirely up to him to make up his mind on that. But the ETS is an interesting part of that discussion nonetheless, because that is a type of instrument where you can find a good balance between a CO2 price and actually what you need to make sure that the sustainable alternative comes to the market. We created this instrument of so-called SAF allowances. That means, like, I, as an airline, don't pay effectively the CO2 price if I can show that I'm actually using a fuel that puts me on the CO2 neutral pathway. I think that's an interesting instrument. It's also my personal opinion is, like the colleagues in the climate department, it's an interesting thing to look at. How is that functioning, and what role can that play?
Thank you. I would have many other questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time. So let me thank our speakers. And please join me now in welcoming our Master of Ceremony and Senior Policy Editor Jan Czensky to deliver a series of editorial takeaways on the mobility stream. And I kindly ask you to remain seated, and thank you for your attention.